Welcome to week 10 of ALC314. We're going to talk about commodity activism today. It's a term that is basically being coined by academics. It's not necessarily a term that has come from the advertising industry itself, but it has come from people who study the advertising industry. It comes from a field called critical consumer studies. And commodity activism is probably a way to understand what's been happening in our culture over the last probably 30 or 40 years. But it defines a shifted politics. And it's where the active consumption is defined a little bit differently, that it is political activity itself. As much as voting or as much as campaigning, it becomes another form of political activity. But one of the things that has happened is that we've individualized a lot of our choices about what is this kind of politics. In other words, what we buy becomes a political decision. It has a long, long history. In the United States, there was a guy named Ralph Nader who used to write these things called Consumer Reports back in the 60s and into the 70s. And it was basically taking apart corporations for producing lemon products. So he would do a close study of them, and through that determine that this product was not either safe to use or didn't hold up to what it said in its advertising as well. And that is a kind of consumer activism. But what's changed in the last maybe 30 or 40 years is a move towards something that has always been there, but is just much more that consumers are making decisions about particular purchases based on what a corporation does. So one of the things that's changed is, yes, individualized responsibility, but another thing that's changed is that corporations use the idea of ethical behavior as a way to encourage consumers to be attracted to them in terms of their products. So it's a big change where, in a sense, this has emerged from the way that brands are a kind of value. Over and above the product itself, you can insert new values which have an emotional attachment to them no matter what happens. So this expresses what is called neoliberalism in two ways. It's a decline in traditional politics into, yes, an expression of what we live in now. Very, very powerful corporations. So corporate power is expanded in this neoliberal era. And the second one is neoliberalism describes, and commodity activism is symptomatic of neoliberalism, describes the rise of empowerment politics, that we are empowered to use the marketplace as a way to solve political and cultural issues. Okay, that is the conceptual way of thinking about it. But sometimes it's a bit better to go through examples, and got some nice pictures there of some of the examples that are in our readings. And the two readings this week are from the same book, which looks at commodity activism. And it's the two editors of the book, Mukherjee and Bennett Weiser. And then Bennett Weiser looking very specifically at the Dove campaign. So what's happened is that the citizen has changed. They're not just voting. They're actually voting by what they buy as well. And this becomes a kind of citizen consumer. And a citizen consumer is engaged in politics quite differently. They see and sometimes judge you by what you buy. So someone who is kind of against cruelty to animals might look at you and see what shoes you're wearing and sort of damn you by saying strange things or giving you strange looks as you walk down the street. At this moment, you know, animal rights may not be what I'm thinking about as my dog barks, but that is an example of how a consumer makes a very political decision about where they shop, what they buy, and that determines their whole identity in some ways. But what has also happened is corporations are also trying to attach themselves to this way in which consumers construct and manufacture their identity. And so what you have is consumers becoming cause-sumers as citizen consumers. They get behind a cause and hold on to it. And these causes are different ideas of authenticity. Their authenticity for the corporation, that they're somehow connected to a real politics of the moment, and their authenticity in a big way for the consumers as well. And thank you, Sandy, for showing off your beautiful backside. The one that Bennett Weiser looks at is the Dove Real Beauty campaign, which is made by a very big soap company or products of home products, Unilever, which you might know, large advertising budget attached to it. And about 7 or 8 years ago, they started the Real Beauty campaign. And in that campaign, they started to challenge the way that their products, which Unilever and Dove specifically had been focused on for a century in manufacturing, the notion of what constitutes femininity. And they started saying, well, maybe this isn't fair to young people, which is an issue. People's own self-esteem is challenged partly by the images that young girls specifically see on television and in ads that are almost unachievable. We know because they've been photoshopped or transformed in all sorts of different ways. And Dove decided, well, we're going to be the soap manufacturer or cosmetic manufacturer that is saying we're going to be much more concerned about real beauty as opposed to the highly fabricated beauty that you might see on the cover of Vogue or Harper's Bazaar. So they developed this campaign and they funded it well. They developed all sorts of techniques that went into the school system, all sorts of techniques that sort of said, let's think about beauty in a much different way. All of them incredibly valuable to society. At the same time, it's a corporation that's selling lots of other strange products that might not have the same corporate social responsibility. And it is a company that didn't think that way necessarily before, and definitely right across the corporation doesn't think that way. Nonetheless, powerful, powerful campaign, and it continues. The Real Beauty campaign has had a long run. Starbucks is another interesting one. About 12 to 14 years ago, this came from consumers attacking Starbucks for not using coffee that didn't have almost a slave-like labor system in Central and South America in particular. And these consumers pushed Starbucks to engage in fair trade coffee. They took on the idea of it and appropriated it quite completely. Fair trade coffee became one of the symbols that Starbucks holds dear to their own brand, as they describe themselves as a kind of handcrafted kind of notion of coffee, which is kind of bizarre in itself. And the third one there is the Red campaign, which we might associate with Bono from U2, or maybe Oprah as well. And this campaign is trying to get global funds back into the real issues of Africa. But every time you buy a Red product of any of these products, which includes Starbucks and Coca-Cola and all sorts of other ones, Head Sports Gear, you are simultaneously giving a percentage of the profit that's achieved from that back into this global fund, which is to fund AIDS research or AIDS pharmaceutical distribution into Africa. Massive, massive campaign. Makes all those corporations feel good. Makes us feel good when we buy the products too. All right, so those are the examples, the key examples. There's thousands of other ones that are around there. And we'll just go on to what we are doing as consumers in this activist way. Well, one of the things that's happening, as you can see, is it's co-production. The company is producing some environment which is ethical and filled with values, and we actually give that value by telling others why we go to Starbucks or why we buy only organic coffee if you were going to a slightly different one. In that way, as I described before, as consumers, we are empowering ourselves. We're taking on our everyday life and not just allowing it to happen to us, but we're saying we're making these decisions and we're giving certain corporations our kind of ethical core, saying, all right, we'll support you as much as you are supporting these sorts of things. That produces what some theorists talk about is affective labor by us. And that's the co-production quality. We give back to the brand all this positive energy. And they, as a brand, become actually a little bit more powerful, particularly in those specific communities. In a way, as it says, as I say in the PowerPoint, it's an expression of lifestyle politics. A lifestyle politics as much for the corporation as for the individual, him or herself, or the family. So what is occurring in this commodity activism is a politics that isn't necessarily bad or good. It's a shifted politics, not done by regulation by governments, but by a relationship that we've described before about how brands connect corporations to consumers. And in a sense, this is a repercussion of that connection. That in that connection, the meaning of the brand is very much attached to what values we give the brand. We imbue to the brand by using it in a particular way. The brand has to have meaning, authenticity in contemporary culture. And so it has to somehow make sense, make it emotionally valuable for me to buy this particular thing. And through that, the consumer and the corporation come to a kind of meeting ground through the brand itself and what the brand means. So what it does, in a way, is produce a kind of new generation of corporate social responsibility, commonly known as CSR, and a kind of new ethical consumption that invades our environmental politics of the current time and a lot of our food politics, if you want to describe that right now. But you could see it invading lots of other spaces as well. And I think you'll notice as we go to the discussion board that it's interesting to think about where we make those sort of decisions. What kinds of brands push us to this notion of a consumer? And there's certain ones that will do it to you and other ones that won't. So if you happen to see how chickens are manufactured, you might pull back from buying chickens. And you become a consumer that goes out there and tells other people about what they should buy and not buy. Think about those things and discuss it on the discussion board. What are your buying choices? And when you make literally a perfunctory choice of nothing, you just go buy, buy, buy. And when you make this choice that says, this is who I am, this is where I come from, this is who I am and how I want to be. I'm starting to sound like Stephen Colbert. Except I'm sick. Are consumers more savvy now? Do we actually think we are a little bit more aware of what's on the label and what the product or the brand actually means in the culture itself? And I think ultimately this is going to help you with your Gallery 2 assignment. It may not look like it's going to help you specifically, but think about how your brand provides something authentic for your consumers, potentially your market, and think about how it invades in a very ethical and positive and affirming way into their minds, that they somehow become a laboring, producing, promoting sponsor of your company. I'll see you on the discussion boards, and again, enjoy week 10.